As far as the questions from the audience,
they're supposed to come painting bed, rugs or whatever. They got done, but they was looking at furniture.
thank y'all for coming tonight. Appreciate it.
No.
Yeah, I know. He recognized me like I knew him. Yeah. It's just my age. It takes me a while to get it recorded. Yeah. Or recall it. Just like a boot. Yeah, recall it.
Test. Okay. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, well, good evening. My name is Shane Laws. I'm the CEO of Victory Electric, and I appreciate you joining us this evening for the meeting to have a question and answer session and to discuss the extreme weather event that we had back in February. Again, kind of the format of the meeting, I have a PowerPoint presentation. As you can see, we'll go through that. It'll kind of highlight some of the main drivers behind the weather event, what caused the issue, some of the financial impacts, and then the proposed method for handling the event with the board. And so once we get through the PowerPoint presentation, I'll stand for any questions that you may have. We can talk about any and all that you want to discuss. And once the meeting is concluded, then the board will retire to the boardroom and have a special call board meeting to consider adopting the rate rider that we're discussing. So with that, we'll get going. Okay, so I'm going to sit right here where I can see. So what happened? Well, clearly in February this year we had a cold weather event and started on or about the 15th and went through about the 19th. And we had extreme cold weather across much of central United States, and it caused an increase in demand for natural gas, home heating, and power generation. The natural gas production was limited due to cold weather conditions, and specifically on that, what was going on is we had a lot of the gas supply. It was actually freezing up at the wellhead, which exacerbated the problem. You had an extreme demand on the system, the gas system, freezing up at the wellhead, so the supply was limited. Wind was not as available due to the operational limitations during cold weather, and what we realized is that while we have some wind contracts, firm power wind contracts, and we were able to see a little bit of utilization out of the wind, but the main issue for the wind is that anything at or below 5 degrees, those wind turbines do not operate. They shut them off. And as y'all well know, we had extreme temperatures well below the 5 degrees, so we did not get to utilize that wind energy like we normally would. And again, I'll show a graph here in a little bit that talks about the percentages prior to and then kind of that week of, and show the different generational mixes that we had on the system. So many other conventional power generation sources were offline for a myriad of reasons. So we'll get into the details, but as far as the energy emergency alert that SPP, the Southwest Power Pool, gives us, when it got to an energy EEA level 1, all of anybody that has generation within the SPP footprint is required to bring that generation on. Okay, so as you know, Fort Dodge Station is a gen set that Sunflower owns right here in our backyard, as well as several others. There's some in Great Bend and kind of spotty around our system that we haven't run in quite some time. And so we don't have firm gas contracts for those units. But we keep them exercised, they run, they work, and so when we're called to bring them on, we do so. But we had to go to the market and buy gas for those units. So, as a regional transmission organization and balancing authority, SPP determined their 14-state region did not have enough available generation to meet region-wide demand for electricity. They issued an energy emergency alert and directed generation and transmission operating utilities like Sunflower Electric to reduce their system energy use by the amount needed to bring the supply and demand back in balance. Here's some of the organizational roles and responsibilities, and basically what we've got here is Victory Electric and the fact that we're the local distribution cooperative. We serve all or parts of 9 counties. We do not own any power generation. So Victory, as Victory, the electric distribution cooperative here, we don't own any generation, but we are a member owner of Sunflower Electric, and Sunflower has all the generation and transmission assets that we're referencing. Some other examples of distribution co-ops include Wheatland and Scott City, Pioneer, and Ulysses and Lane Scott and Dighton. That's a few of them on the Sunflower system. Then you have Sunflower Electric, which is a generation and transmission utility. And they are our wholesale power supplier. So again, we are one of 6 owners, and we have a wholesale power contract through Sunflower. But when SPP issued a load shed directive during an energy emergency, Sunflower had to choose load block areas to curtail in order to meet the directives. So basically, on February 15th, SPP, and forgive me, these numbers may not make any sense, but you'll understand when I talk about the scale. On February 15th, when SPP called for the first rolling blackout, and that's an EEA level 3, it's immediate. They needed it right now, and they needed 14 megawatts. To put that into perspective, 14 megawatts is just under the size of one of the beef packing plants. So a national beef or a Cargill is going to be at or about 17 megawatts. So that gives you kind of the perspective and the size. That 14 megawatt call was within the Sunflower footprint. So basically all, or the most better part of the western half of the state, okay? The very next day, it went from 14 megawatts to 60 megawatts, okay? So that was the level of concern. Now what happens is, the system runs, there's a frequency and there's a balance, and they try to match the generation assets up with the demand or the electricity demand on the system. And they keep this, and it ebbs and flows. It operates on 60 cycles a second. Anytime that gets below a certain threshold, there are under-frequency relays on the system to protect the generation assets, and they will automatically start tripping out. That's the reason why we have to curtail, because if we were to have gone black, meaning had we not had the rolling blackouts, so we're inconvenienced for anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour. Had we not had that, and we'd gone full black, it could have been 2 to 3 weeks before we got the system back up. What happens is the generators kick out, the system goes black, the cold weather events, things start freezing up, and then you either have to wait on Mother Nature to cooperate or have plans in place to get things back online. And like I said, that can take weeks. I've been in this business 27 years. I've seen this happen twice in my career. Once in Texas in the spring, and then once here this February. So Sunflower owns a coal plant in Holcomb, various natural gas generating plants like I talked about. We have a solar farm, and we have purchase power agreements with several wind farms. Southwest Power Pool, they are the regional transmission organization, and they're regulated by FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and it grants them the responsibilities and authorities to ensure the reliability of the regional electric grid. SPP coordinates the dispatch of the region's power generation and high voltage transmission lines to keep electric power supply and demand balanced across the 14 states, and that's what I was talking about, balancing the resources with the load. If SPP determines that the region doesn't have enough generation to demand, they issue an energy emergency alert, just like we talked about, and they direct the G&T utilities to reduce the system energy use by the amount needed to bring that supply and demand back into balance. What you see here is a footprint of SPP, so parts of Montana, North Dakota, 14-state region, dipping all the way down into Texas. That gives you an idea of the size of the footprint that SPP encompasses. What this picture shows, it's showing the lowest temperature forecast for the February 14th through the 16th of this year. And as you can see, this red hash mark here is all of the SPP region, and then that blue temperature is the temperatures that were below 0 degrees Fahrenheit. What this is this is showing a February cost of gas versus the cost of coal. And what we have here is this yellow line. These yellow lines down here are coal, prices of coal, and this line here is the weighted average cost of gas. Now, bear with me for a minute. You can see that the scale gets a little crazy. Now, what we normally see is on a dollar per megawatt hour, coal is typically and traditionally trading down around this $1.58 number, okay? And natural gas historically is going to be at or around $2.50 an MMBTU. Well, on or about the 10th, you see the natural gas prices going up. And that's because of that whole supply and demand issue, right? It's a free market. It operates based on supply and demand. As demand goes up, supply goes down, the cost goes up, right? And then as you move across this x-axis here, that's, the dates, the 13th, the 14th, the 15th, and you can see this shoot up exponentially up to as much as, $350 or nearly $350 per MMBTU for that stretch of that period, and then it dipped back down on or about the 18th, down to $57. Okay, so going from $2.50 to as high as $330 an MMBTU, and then back down to this $57.88. Sunflowers has a hedging strategy, and one of the things we do, we utilize Holcomb, and it provided a significant hedge against that market energy price throughout the month of February, and especially during that period that we were talking about when the market prices were really high. Holcomb hedge February 10th to the 20th was at $63, was 63% hedged. So our system-wide sunflower system, we were utilizing Holcomb for about 63% of our needs. And then during the energy emergency alert, it was making up about 70%. We also have the renewable energy PPAs that provide some of that hedge. So we have a piece of solar, we have a 20 megawatt solar array that we have purchase power agreement down in Johnson. And it's, again, 20 megawatts. And then we have a couple of firm fixed price wind energy hedges, and they made up 5.4% or roughly 5.3% during that energy emergency alert. But the total hedge provided by all those resources during that energy emergency alert was 75.5%. So what we're trying to do is give you an idea. We were hedged 75%, yet we still saw a huge increase in our wholesale cost of power. Now, this is the SPP generation fuel resource mix. The graph here on the left, generation mix during cold weather event, and then the SPP year-to-date generation mix excluding the event. Now, what I want to illustrate here is you see that during the cold weather event, SPP, that entire 14-state footprint, only had about a 10% wind impact. During a normal year-to-date, it's about 31%. And then you can see the coal and during the weather event was about 43%, and on average about 37%. And then you can see the other mixes: nuclear, hydro, and some imports from other regions. The reason why you see this import is because SPP actually had to get about 6,000 megawatts of power from another state because we were so short. Now, what you're seeing here is, over here on the left, these are the regional transmission organizations across the United States. Clearly you can see SPP here, that's the one we're a part of. Many of us, and if you hadn't heard about it, I'd be surprised, but ERCOT down in Texas, okay? January of 2021, these are the average cost dollars per megawatt hour in the day-ahead market, okay? So the day-ahead market, this is what you could buy energy for. Now, when I tell you dollars per megawatt hour, this, I'll convert it for you. That's 2.2 cents or 2.3 cents per kilowatt hour, okay? So in January, 2.3 cents per kilowatt hour in the SPP footprint, the cheapest across the nation, okay? It went to 676 during February. ERCOT, you can see $2 or $25 a megawatt hour, 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour, went to $1,800 a megawatt hour, or $1.80 a kilowatt hour. This is a comparison of the SPP energy costs. February, you can see it's basically $14 a megawatt hour, or 1.5 cents a kilowatt hour, and then in February it went to $596 a megawatt hour, or 60 cents a kilowatt hour. Okay, so what this is showing is basically the fuel and purchase power and kind of the mix. So you saw that $596 SPP day-ahead market price. That's it right here. Okay. Our gas units cost us an additional $75 a megawatt hour. So those units like Fort Dodge Station, those and Great Bend and some other areas it made an impact on Sunflower's bill by another $75 a megawatt hour, or 7.5 cents a kilowatt hour. Okay, what you see here is that Holcomb hedge that we talked about. That's 75% or 70% Holcomb, and then our renewable units right here. We basically, that's what we saved. That's a reduction from this 596. So your all-in average cost, dollars per megawatt hour, is 305 right here, or 30 cents a kilowatt hour. So again, we talked about the scale. We were hedged 75% with Holcomb coal, right? We had our renewable resources online, 75%, and yet we still paid 30 cents a kilowatt hour. Unbelievable, right? And hard to fathom. It's really concerning, and I don't care which way you lean on the political spectrum, but when you have an event like this and there's an administration or a move to do away with coal, that doesn't play well in this scenario, right? So what I'm telling you is the cost of power, wholesale power, would have been twice what it was had we not had Holcomb and our renewable assets. Now, there's a big push for the renewable, and we're on board with that, but we're thankful we had a 70% hedge with Holcomb. Okay, so Sunflower's KWH budget versus estimate, and you can see right here, the budget for February was, in this level here. In these different bars, fuel and purchase power is this little yellow bar. Here's what happened in February, the actual. You can see the scale difference relative to what we had budgeted down here. So the financial impact on members. Our wholesale power cost, it was an additional $15 million. Our bill from Sunflower for the month of February was just over $18 million. A normal month, about 3 this time of year, right? So a normal February, on average, is about $3 million. It was $18 million based on this event. And so by $18 million, I'm talking about, it's not just the month of February, it was basically 1 week at an additional $15 million to our wholesale cost of power. Normally, natural gas, wind, and solar is and the cost of fuel is recovered through the energy cost adjustment, the ECA on your bill. You may have noticed that component, energy cost adjustment. So as fuel costs go up or down each month, that particular mechanism, the ECA, is used where the past few months have been passing through as much as $0.015 per kilowatt hour credit. So basically, taking $0.015 per kilowatt hour off your bill. But it can either be a charge or a credit depending upon the energy markets and the price of fuel, and it allows us to respond to monthly market fluctuations without implementing a rate change. So we recognize when an extraordinary event happens, like February's extreme cold, recovering increased costs through a single month ECA charge would create financial hardships. Our tariff, the formal document that we utilize to recover the energy cost adjustment, specifies that we can only recover those costs in the month they were incurred or in a 1 month charge. Well, given the size of the bill, clearly we don't want to do that. Hence, that's why we're having the discussion tonight, for you to ask questions and for the board to consider adding the rider that we've discussed to allow us to recover those charges over 24 months. So that's the goal. The proposed extraordinary event cost recovery rider, it allows Victory to lessen the financial burden on members by extending that period and recovering those costs over 24 months. With the proposed rider starting in April, Victory will be billing statements will have an extraordinary event recovery bill component, so an EER line item on your bill, and the average residential member could expect about $300 for that event. And let me qualify that. That's an average. Some of us are going to be higher, some of us are going to be less. But when you look at the residential accounts across the system, the average was $300. Spreading that out over a 24-month period adds an additional $12.50 a month. And so, one of the things that's important too that we wanted to recognize is how could we, when we were discussing the recovery, how can we do this in the most fair and equitable way and recognize those members or businesses for that matter that curtailed during that event. Okay, so whether or not they were in a rolling blackout as a part of a particular group that got, was off, or if they ran their own generation. And what we said was what we're going to do is go back, and so from the 15th through the 19th, what we did is we pulled the interval data off of every member's meter, okay, down to the hour. We know exactly the kilowatt hour consumption that any and all of you had at your home or business for that event. We took the $15 million and we divided it by the total system kilowatt hours for that week, through the 15th through the 19th, came up with an allocation factor, and then took that against your own to develop and to find out and determine what your particular individual charge would be for that period. So, I've said a mouthful. I'd love to hear any questions that you have, but at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is make it as easy for the members, recognizing that it's a terrible situation. None of us could have foreseen what the weather was going to be like, and clearly couldn't have foreseen what the energy markets and the natural gas spot prices of gas were going to be, right, or energy in the day ahead market. And so we want to spread that out over 24 months and lessen the burden. Now, many of you are probably wondering, well, what if we want to pay it off early? You can do that. If you don't want to spread that out over 24 months, we're happy to accommodate that. All we ask is that you call in and we make sure that it is applied directly to that event. Otherwise, if you just called over the phone and maybe got online and paid your bill, the way our system works is it's a bit of a challenge on our CIS billing system. It would automatically give you a bill credit when applied directly to that. So that's why we have to do somewhat of a manual process with that particular piece. So with that, I'll stop talking and offer an opportunity to you to ask any questions you may have. Any questions?
Yeah,
Yes, ma'am.
It's not a question, it's just, I'd like to say, whoever came up with this idea, that's a great thing. Kudos.
Well, you're looking at them right here as our board of trustees, and but not for their leadership and support, we wouldn't be able to do this. So we intend to try to lessen the burden. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I want to make sure that I understand this. So on my bill starting in April, I will have a line that says, this is how much extra is added to your bill to pay my share
Of that event.
of that event.
Correct.
Okay, and if I wanted to pay the whole thing off,
Yes, ma'am.
I would have to call in to find out how much that was, because it sounds to me like everybody will get a different amount depending on how much energy they used during that few days.
That is correct. So, as she said, if you couldn't hear, everybody's different, right? And so, if you wanted to pay it all off, you would call in. But if you wanted a Victory to carry it for 6 months, there's going to be a running total, and you'll see what your balance is every month, what's left, and then what would be the additional piece. So, we got it in the programming on our billing system to show that on everybody's bill, their individual pro rata share, what's been paid, what's still owing, or not for that matter.
Right, and then I have another comment to make.
Yes, ma'am.
My understanding is that the wind blows all the time in Kansas, as we can hear. Why did the wind towers stop working?
So the issue with the wind towers is there's an operational limit on those turbines, and at or below 5 degrees, they shut off.
The grease doesn't work to...
You know what? We've got a resident expert that used to work on them. Rob, can you answer that a little better than I can?
The wind turbines will get a lot of ice built up on the blades, and then that messes up the aerodynamics of the blade.
Oh,
and,
okay.
and then they just don't have the push to turn the generator fast enough to create power.
Okay.
a lot of times. And
Okay, so you need to put a little heater on the blades to keep
yeah,
them
that'd be
nice.
great.
It's a question of moisture in the air.
Yeah, moisture in the air. The blades are fiberglass. Once they get colder, they don't flex the same as they would. So there's a lot of moving parts to that.
Because as far as lubricants go, I lived 10 years in Alaska, and I know when things get really cold and you still need to move things around, we use dry lubricants like graphite and things like that, so that we don't have to worry about things clogging up. And
Then you're talking a lot of expense when you're talking that deal.
I understand. So
That's not cost
the
effective.
alternative to the extra expense is to just shut shit down. I got a question, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, you know, I was just going by your website, cost, deflated costs for the freeze period there. You know, not just what you just said, but so which is a little bit different. So you said $2.75 to $4.15 on your website per MMBTU, okay? And that increased up to $339 to $999 per MMBTU.
Right.
Okay, so from $2.75 to $339, for example. Okay, and you know I hear this free market bullshit all the time, which simply means that supply and demand. If the demand is high, supply is low, the supplier can charge whatever the hell they want, and they can gouge whatever they want. I've seen it in Katrina when I was down there, and people charging extra for a gallon of gasoline or a gallon of water, somebody to drink, just gouging the shit out of people. Okay? So you got a situation here where just based on your website, 12,000 to 24,000% increase. That's what it was.
As far as the cost of natural gas at any particular time, it did go.
You're basing this all on natural gas.
That's correct.
Okay, so a 12,000%.
I don't disagree.
To
I'm not doing the
24,000%
math.
increase. If I charge you twice as much, that's only 100% increase for something.
That's right.
But to get that's obscene that somebody can gouge that much because you've only got so much to spread around anyway.
Right. We don't
So
disagree.
we're
with
talking
you.
about people making incredible obscene profits off of that. Now I'm not talking about your company
I
because
don't
you're a
take it that
wholesale
way. I know
buyer.
exactly where you're going with it, and we don't disagree. As a matter of fact, we understand where you're coming from, and so that's a nice segue over into something that I failed to mention, and I appreciate Pat bringing it up. Is that number one? We've had several questions about is there going to be any federal or state aid? Okay, it's pure speculation. We've not heard anything definitively one way or the other. It's been radio silence. However, in the event that we get any federal or state aid, everybody will get their fair share pro rata back, added back, and credited to your account to offset the impact. Now back to your point about what the market.
Oops, we just lost.
All right, can you still hear me, sir?
Oh, there we go.
Okay,
This
so
is my neighborhood. This is what happens. What I was just talking to.
yeah, and you know when you have 50-mile-an-hour winds, lines slap together. Unfortunately, we can't build a system such that it doesn't do that. But forgive us.
Not in this state.
With the natural gas prices, there are traders. I'm sure that yes, clearly Wall Street, some other folks make a ton of money, and you know we're at the mercy of the market. Like I told you, our generation assets that we typically don't run because they're old, they're aging, but they're there for peaking units. When SPP called us, you know, there's no, we don't think we want to run. It's turn it on now. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. Get them on now. We didn't have gas contracts, firm price gas contracts, right? So we're at the mercy of the market. Let me put it in perspective. Sunflower had a gas bill one day, February 15th, $40.5 million. One day. One gas bill. Had we run our gas units on Wednesday, $45 million. We chose to not run them and add an additional $45 million to what was close to a $100 million impact on Sunflower's side. Okay? The issue, and I don't disagree. It's obscene what the prices did. Now, I'm sure there's lessons learned. There's probably going to be some things to fix, hopefully, these blowouts. Now, I can tell you, Sunflower, we sit on the board, member owner of Sunflower. We can make the decision to put in financial hedges. But at what cost, right? That's the concern. It's gambling. We haven't seen an event like this, anywhere near this, in 10 or 12 years, right, as far as the impact on the markets. But yet, everybody's up in arms, and I don't disagree. But at what cost? We can build some protections in, but you're not going to like it when we bill you that every month. So it's kind of what's our risk tolerance? And so those are the discussions that are going on at the board level currently, is what is reasonable for all of us at our homes? How much more do we have to pay to offset something like this? Or do we not worry about it and just know that, hopefully it doesn't happen every 10 or 12 years. But this was a big one. This was a really big one. And then it also gets back into the operational side. The event was so bad because of the rolling blackouts, the constraints on the natural gas supply. We had to coordinate our efforts with Black Hills and other gas companies in the area, because anytime we shut a big circuit off and had people down, right? Anytime we did that, we had to coordinate with the gas to say, before we bring them on, are y'all ready? Because they had to be sitting there at the regulators to make sure that we didn't drain the lines. We being, when we flip the lights on, the gas units come on, there's this big suck of energy and natural gas with those gas units. You could empty the lines, the gas supply, the lines go empty, the pilot lights go off, and they have to come into the houses and check and light every pilot light, check all of that. That was part of the issue. Then you exacerbate it even more with, if we have that frequency that I referenced in there that the system runs on, right, that 60 hertz, 60 cycles per second, had we gone full black, I talked to you about it earlier, I am not kidding you one bit. When it's serious when we're rolling blackouts, because if it goes black, it's 2 or 3 weeks, maybe a month to get it back up. The average person doesn't understand that, and we respect that. That's not what you do. But it's incumbent upon us to keep the lights on as best we know how. So that's a mouthful, but to your point, the markets were crazy. And so time will tell what that yields as far as prices in the future.
Yeah, okay. I understand you're at the mercy of the market, okay? That's an untenable situation to be in.
Right.
The thing is that this is going to be a more common occurrence as time goes on. Whether anybody believes in climate change, we're going to have hotter summers, colder winters, wetter here, drier there. It's going to be that way. And you're going to have the same power drains when it gets hotter and hotter, and people are still using electricity for air conditioning units. This is going to happen again. So let's do a hypothetical here. We're paying off an extra $300 or plus or whatever for over a 24-month period. Next winter comes along, or this summer, we enter another similar situation where, you know what, the demand, the market has gone crazy again. We got to pay. We're at the mercy. We're at the mercy of these utility suppliers, and we got to tack that on to the next one, tack it on to the next one. You understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
The future is not so bright.
Yeah, there's
we have to change things around. So we're screwed right now. We can't do anything about it. And I understand your situation and try to make screwing as painless as possible by stretching it over 24 months.
Right.
Okay? But nonetheless, we are screwed. We're going to get screwed again, probably far less than 10 years down the road.
Yeah, and so let me lay it out for you as an example. To your point, what he's saying is some concern of ours because of the current, again, not to be political, but we can't help but be political when you talk about administrations. I don't care which side of the aisle you're on. There's a big push for coal to go away, right? The challenge is, when we made the decisions back in the day, those to build a power plant, okay, in the 70s or 80s, back then, or whenever they were built all across the country, those are 50 and 60-year decisions, right? Well, you build it, everybody's all for it, here we go, it's cheap power, and then an administration change happens, and then somebody says, we don't like it, it's killing people, it's causing cancer, or whatever their argument may or may not be, right? May be. We have a fixed cost asset sitting there with 40 years of life, right? What have you. Just to shut it down doesn't necessarily fix the problem, right? You still have the debt, you're not getting any kilowatt hour production out of that asset. You got a fixed cost asset, you're paying the note, and then want us to go and invest in whether it's solar or wind, which we are doing currently. We have a 20 megawatt array, solar array from Johnson. We're looking at 2 additional 20 megawatt arrays for 40, 60 total currently on our system, because that cost, that generation asset is coming down and it's becoming more affordable. We're even looking at battery storage as an option. We're doing an integrated resource plan, but it's not just as easy to say, stop with one, start with another. And so that's the challenge that we're facing. And then it gets back to that issue I talked about earlier. What is our risk tolerance, right? All of us are different. Some of us are willing to gamble a lot, some of us aren't. Meaning, okay, Victory, we want you to protect us in these events. To your point, well, we can go to Sunflower and say, we want you to hedge our energy, and we want to cap it. Well, that financial hedge is just that, financial. It costs money. So if I told you, and I'm just going to pick a number, if you went at your house from 11 cents a kilowatt hour all in to 13, 15 cents, are you willing to pay it? That's it. I'm not asking you to answer it. I'm just saying that's the questions that we have to try to answer for our membership. Not easy. What you're saying is accurate, but they're not easy fixes. And that's basically what I have to say. It's not simple.
I know it's not simple. I'm a pretty pragmatic guy. I understand that. But all these issues that we're talking about are fixable, or we don't even have to deal with them. I lived in different states. I said I lived in Alaska for 10 years. From Prudhoe down to Valdez, they got to keep that oil flowing all the time, even though it's in decline. They still got to keep it. They know how to winterize the goddamn shit. Okay.
Sure.
To make money. It's not like this is rocket science. We know how to do it. So we don't do it.
There is
now
some
I
of that.
understand there's extra costs in winterizing things, and I understand there's governors on the wind turbines because they can't. If the wind blows too hard, they're going to. They're not set up for that. It gets too cold, it gets too wet, blah blah blah. And there's no petroleum and fossil fuels. These are all transitional fuels if we're ever going to go to a total clean, green, whatever it is. But if we ever do anything like that, we sure have to have our act together. We can't be like Texas, for Christ's sake. They knew damn well. I was living down there 10 years ago, and I heard that warning they had.
Yeah,
and
you're right.
that was the first time. They had it before. They did it. They just didn't do it.
They didn't do it, they're paying the price. Quite honestly.
No, you know who's paying the price? Is the people are paying the price. The people are paying the price, not the goddamn companies.
I'm referring to the people. You're exactly right. The people are paying the price. And you raise a good point. Again, back to there's lessons learned. And there could be regulation, there could be oversight, regulatory oversight, which makes sense in some of these scenarios, because in Texas, they were told 10 years ago that they should have winterized. They chose not to. They're paying the price. They being all of those people impacted.
Did we do the same thing? You talked about here in Kansas and elsewhere. Things did winterize them. Did we play the game too?
So I think we did a better job than other states, but to say that we were perfect as far as our winterization efforts, I'm not going to say that. And I think that we can do a better job. But what I am very proud of is the job that Sunflower did that I just referenced, 75% hedge. Had we not, it could have been much uglier. And so for that, I think we performed very well. I'm not going to speculate and or speak on anybody else's behalf, any other generators within the state. I don't know their details.
Okay, for me, I for one, I don't want to be put in this situation ever again, right? And I've used less electricity, less gas, less water every year than the previous year. You can look, I've got my bill right here in front of you. And yet, it's higher and higher and higher. My mom is on a fixed income. Her income doesn't keep up with these costs, all right? None of this stuff. So, granted, if you're going to get screwed and you want to spread it out, that makes a little, her Social Security, she can do a little bit less instead of a whole lot less. Well, okay, you got $1,400 check that can go to the utility companies this time around. She can anyway. Okay.
Is this a filibuster?
Yeah, unless you outlaw it. Okay.
Go ahead and finish your statement, sir.
Yeah. Okay. I'm setting up I haven't set up. In case the power goes out, I've got 2 100-pound tanks of propane. I know that'll last 2 weeks. Okay, it'll keep that one space warm, keep everything going. Of course, you can't do anything about the water. You have to let the water run in. But I mean, the thing is it's on us to say, hey, we're not, just shut it off. Just shut the freaking, don't use any electricity during that time. Then what, are we still going to get billed for it? We're still going to get billed for what we don't use?
So you're only going to be billed for the kilowatt hour consumption that you had from February 15th through February 19th. The extra, the $15 million impact, the only piece you're going to be billed, if your power was off, you're only going to get your pro rata share for the hours and kilowatt hours you used. That's it. We're not going to do it over the whole month.
So in a future event, Weather Channel says, hey, we're going to have sub-zero temperatures. We're going to have freezing temperatures. I say, hey, shut it down. We're going to hold, we're going to hunker down here like, just do in Alaska, and we're going to keep ourselves warm, and we're not going to, and then we don't have to worry about paying this crap. Is that right?
That is correct.
Right.
That is correct. Thank you for
I
your
gotta
comments.
fix
Anybody
it.
else? Yes, sir.
If I remember the graph right, you said natural gas prices right now are $56.
No, that's what they were during, at the end of the event.
Okay, have they come back down to?
They have come down considerably. I don't know what the average is. I haven't looked. I should look today. But historically, what we have seen is that gas is trading at about $2.50 an MMBTU. And so it's not anywhere near what it was in that graph.
With what the current administration is wanting to do, I mean, they're already shutting down pipelines. I totally expect that natural gas prices, because of supply, are going to go back up. Have you thought about that? Have you done estimates to reconsider whether or not you should hedge some natural gas?
We're in the process of that currently. And again, it gets back to, fuel. That's one thing, natural gas fuel for the units that utilize that particular fuel, up to and including any kind of full-scale integrated resource plan to reevaluate any and all of our generation assets. Coal, we've got coal, gas, solar, wind, and then what I talked about earlier is that we've actually seen battery storage in the money now. That's a game changer. So as we utilize the solar, as we develop more solar, because the cost of that is at or below baseload generation, much like a lot of the coal plants are. It's at or below that cost, and then when you integrate battery storage into that, that's another level that we can leverage to bring that wholesale cost of power down. So that's what we're doing. I don't have a firm answer for you now. We're just in the middle of this evaluation, but we are looking at it.
Yeah, because it seems to me anyway that wind energy is not anything that you can count on.
You're right.
It
So when
gets
it's
windy,
hot,
it gets
the wind
cold.
doesn't blow, and when it's cold, the wind didn't blow or the turbines didn't operate, right? So it went from a typical 31% in SPP's footprint wind to about 10. And that wasn't 10 in Kansas, that was 10 across 14 states, right? The wind just didn't blow during that event. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
You're talking about hedging. I had a little different idea for hedging in mind. How many of your Sunflower's gas-fired plants have an alternative fuel source for events just like this?
We don't have any like that. They're all gas.
Well, the reason I ask is because remember I said power plant there in Larned, when it was up in operation, had a huge fuel oil tank, and it was in those days it was an interruptible customer. And when it got cold out, they'd send the city notice and they'd say, okay, we're going to cut you off. Well, what Dad and all the rest of them would do is fire up the other boilers on the fuel oil and get right on through the natural gas cutoff. Is there anything that can be done toward an alternative source? Yeah, I realize it'd be expensive,
Retrofitting
but
those
this is
units-
expensive too.
Yeah, retrofitting those units doesn't make economic sense along with the EPA requirements that you have the EPA guidelines for emissions on those units, and oftentimes keeping them within the tolerances that the EPA, stipulates is not
That's
cost
what I was
effective.
wondering, is if
We feel
EPA
like
would
there are other
allow.
ways to do a better job of hedging via even a financial transaction that would cap it at some level and looking at what that would be relative to a retrofit. It's not that technology doesn't work, it does. It's old school, and it was reliable.
But
there
I'm
are other
wondering about
challenges with it.
EPA on that too,
That's
because,
correct.
you know, even as I asked that question, I had that in the back of the mind.
Sure, it's a fair question.
You know, I just know that it did work once.
Sure. Any other questions or thoughts? Yes, ma'am.
One of the questions I keep getting is, this was forecast, maybe not to be quite as bad as it was, but during that week prior to the event, did energy start to be stockpiled or increased at all prior to that?
So prior to the event, you saw the markets reacting, and if you recall on some of the previous graphs, you'd see like that average cost day ahead, spot price of energy and or natural gas ticking up. And so they were moving in that direction, but what happened was, it wasn't what they predicted, it was worse. And so you just see this exponential increase in the cost. And so, you know, it's not a perfect system. Other questions?
When you look at a bill that's 500 times more than the average household, we can't come in and hedge, do a pre-hedge to save or, you know, to offset our risk. We can't go to a different supplier.
Right.
To get electricity, we're stuck with Victory Electric, which I'm not saying that's good or bad. But you know, if your bill is 18 million and you covered on 75%, so what are you trying to recoup? 3 or 4 or 5 million?
I'm sorry, say that again, Gerald.
So if your bill was 18 million and you recovered on 75% of that, so you're trying to recoup what, 4 or 5 million dollars?
No, the extra was 15 million.
15 million.
The extra was 15 million. I'm just, the 75% hedge, it would have been, theoretically, could have been twice that.
So we're talking about a figure at our place, which we're probably one of your top 3 or 3 or 4 users of your electricity. Not only were we out the blackout, which I
Right.
got employees sitting around paying to do nothing.
Right.
We're not talking the amount of $300. Is there a way that instead of shelling that money out, that we could take that out of capital credits?
Counselor, I don't, it's, you know, what we're talking about is the bill's already paid, that's cash. Capital credit's a book number, and we get to retire it if and or when that comes around. We haven't had that discussion yet. You're not the first person that's asked it, but odds are, I don't see us leaning in that direction. I
It's a
don't.
liability you're gonna have to pay at some point in time.
Or not.
Well, that's true.
Or not. And, you know, we went to the bank, borrowed $15 million. So, that's the challenge for us. It doesn't, let me say this. We absolutely are sympathetic and understanding and empathetic with exactly what you're talking about. You know, if we could have prevented it, clearly we would have. But, you know, you get into contractual issues. Gerald, you're in the business, you understand force majeure and acts of God and things that you can't control. And, you know, contracts be damned, you know, the obligation is $18 million.
So at our place, it's cost of doing business. And so at our place, our customers got the right to go anywhere they want.
Right.
And so for us to write down several millions of dollars, we've done that. And we've taken it out of capital credits. And so we've done that.
Well, and I'll tell you this, you know, once we wrap this meeting up, I'm sure that the board will have that discussion. You raise a good point, so we'll definitely consider it.
Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir?
Okay, based on this gentleman's question and your response to it, you know, okay, you borrowed $15 million
Yes?
at 0% interest?
No?
Okay, so you're gonna pay interest on that money up until it's paid off in 2 years, is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, so, what's the incentive if, you know, for us as individuals to pay off our share? Do we get a kickback on some of that interest that would have been paid if we waited?
There are
until 2
carrying
years?
costs for the debt.
Say again?
There are carrying costs for the debt, right? So there's interest. If you pay it off, so for instance, when we send your first bill out in April, okay, it's gonna show the amount that you owe. there's essentially 1 month of carrying cost or interest on that bill. But if you chose to pay it off then, you would have no further interest expense at all. The interest is calculated daily, and we've got it figured in our billing system, so it's an incentive for you to pay it off.
So give me a hypothetical on how much money we're talking about saving by paying it off.
On the
over course
average
of 2
bill,
years.
Angela, she's
It's about $6.5, $7 on an average bill.
$6.50 or $7 on the average bill of interest.
Per month.
No, total.
Total interest for 24 months.
$300.
So a $300 loan at 6% interest, 2 years to pay it off.
Not 6% interest, $6.
$6 is the interest that we would pay over a 2-year period.
So as he's saying, the average bill is $300. The 24 months of finance
Right, there is
cost
no
for the
incentive.
$300 is $6.
I understand. No
Okay.
incentive.
Right?
Can that be paid off at any time after?
It can be paid off at any time after. So if you wanted us to carry it for 6 months, you would only pay 6 months worth of interest. Anything past that you paid off, there would be 0 interest.
But come in and
I'm sorry?
come in person, you said, and let you guys know.
Yes, if you want to let us know, you could do it 6 months later, you could do it, in April, however you want to handle it. And basically, we structured the debt such that anything that we collect after the first 90 days, we can take off the back end of the note, and that just saves all that interest expense anyway, right? And it'll be due and payable in 24 months. Yes, sir.
Would that line item charge on each bill stay with each meter,
It stays with each meter, yes, sir.
not the name?
It's an individual meter by meter charge. You'll see it on each bill.
But if you transfer service to another meter, it will follow you. It does not stay on the meter.
Oh, that's what I see. Is that your question? So if you were to move service,
I got two rental houses sharing a meter in my name because it's on a generator for convenience for them. I thought about splitting it, but that means one house don't get a generator. So I pay 3 meters farm my house, and then I pay for one for 2 rental houses. They reimburse me every month. It's a 40-60 split. Renters come and go.
renters come and go. Yes, sir. It would stay on that meter.
Just be tough to explain to a new renter, you get this fee for February last year.
Angela, in that scenario with the renter, would it go with it wouldn't in that scenario,
Not
would
if
it?
it's in his name.
Right, that's the challenge.
It's whoever used it during that period, it's gonna stay with that name. So we are trying to watch landlords and tenants. If the landlord isn't there and getting charged, because there's not a tenant there, it would stay with the landlord, because it's probably not very many use. If there was a tenant and the tenant moved, it's gonna move to the tenant and not go back to the landlord. So it's.
Do you have a security deposit that you could take that out of possibly?
Well, just regular damage, but not, I don't charge electric.
Understood.
It's never-
Okay, other questions or comments?
Is this a natural disaster where you can turn into your homeowner's insurance?
Not to my knowledge. The state hasn't declared FEMA. Nobody's declared that yet. So that's what we're waiting on is any kind of, federal relief or KM in the case of the state that could make up some of that. But we have not had anybody comment on that yet. I'm not going to hold my breath on that. Other questions?
Shane, I had a customer call and wanted me to ask you, on his bill this month, he showed a $36 credit, and everybody's thinking they're gonna get a higher bill, and he wanted to explain that. I think
Yeah, so which month is he talking about, Daryl? Is he talking
this
about
last bill.
this past month? So it was under a normal billing scenario, and the ECA, the energy cost adjustment factor, was a credit. Angela, do you recall what that was?
It was about
A penny and a quarter of credit back onto the bill. So what you'll see is, we've tried to show it as, going forward on the April bill, you'll have like what we consider a normal bill. You'll have an ECA calculation, you'll have the standard charges, and then you'll have the separate line item to address the extreme weather event. That's where we get.
His ECA credit, or his credit that he's thinking of was actually his ECA for that month.
That is correct.
Have we not had a storm he would've got credit.
Yeah, I mean, we typically over the last few months been running anywhere from a penny to a penny and a half credit per kilowatt hour. So that's how that's worked out. As you saw up there, the average cost per megawatt hour in the SPP footprint was the lowest across the entire nation at, roughly $22 a megawatt hour or 2.2 cents a kilowatt hour. And then so we buy that on the spot price or spot market, and or whether we use our own assets or we buy, actual contracts of energy, and then you have to add in the transformation, the transmission, the distribution charges, wires cost, all of that, and that's how that cost goes up. But the raw commodity price for the energy on average is 2.2 cents in SPP, and you saw it went to 59 cents or 60 cents a kilowatt hour. Okay, good questions. Any other comments or thoughts? I don't want to keep anybody from saying or have an opportunity to speak their piece.
I know you don't do the natural gas deal, but is like the natural gas for that time period kind of the same rate as far as people usage as the electric was going to be too?
So you're talking about at your home?
Well, like business or home.
Sure. So
I mean, are they going to raise it kind of like what you did, since you're talking about the natural gas? Cost of natural gas did the same thing?
natural gas did do the same thing, and we are going to feel it in our homes. Now, I'm not
Home heating bill is going to do, I mean,
yes, we anticipate that's going to be the case. I don't want to speak on behalf of Black Hills Energy, that's not my place. But in the discussions we've had, it's at the commission, they're trying to work those details out. Basically, any and all utilities, whether it's gas or electric, we handle it as a regulatory asset, basically spread that out over a number of months, years, right? My guess is you'll see something very similar from a Black Hills Energy over a number of years. Again, I'm not going to speculate, but it's all that's being worked out. I anticipate personally my own home, yeah, I'm going to get a big gas bill.
I didn't know if it was going to be kind of the same.
It runs right on line with what, again, the commodity price for the gas and the natural gas markets went through the roof. So we'll see it in both places. Good question. Okay. Have I adequately addressed your concerns and answered your questions? Nodding heads would be appreciated. Don't want to leave anybody out. While we don't have perfect answers, perfect solutions, we're trying our best. And at the end of the day, we're here for you. Hence the discussions about a 24-month period and, trying to lighten the burden or lessen the burden on our members. So with that, thank you for your time. Yes, sir.
It's just a little off the whole total thing, but in future time here, we're talking about all these electric vehicles coming on board. How are we going to address that?
So the electric vehicle issue. Clearly, it's becoming a bigger thing, right? And more and more manufacturers are talking about that. You're seeing charging stations. There's kind of a grid system that's being built across the United States because the range on some of those vehicles anywhere from 250 to maybe, there's some maybe up around 400 miles, 350 miles for the higher end ones. It's something to consider, and we're talking about it on a regular basis in our industry. And specifically, how does that work? Because a lot of those stations are behind the meter. So for instance, we have some here in Dodge down at the distillery. So anything that's charged, I don't know whether or not I think it's free if you want to plug up your Tesla there. We just see the kilowatt hours in the meter, so we don't have as big of an issue for that, with that. But when people start wanting to charge for the energy, we have what's called a certificate of convenience and necessity that allows us the ability to charge and/or bill for electric power. We're a utility. Those folks aren't, so therein lies some of the questions and/or the argument. I guess more to come. Stay tuned.
I take it they would be some of the first interruptible customers if another event like this happens.
Who would be interrupted?
Charging stations.
Not necessarily charging stations.
That's what I'm asking. Would
okay, and how those events work, and one of the things, the lessons learned through that event, I'm glad you asked the question. It was changing by the second. So the frequency and the issues with the grid at SPP was changing by the second. And so 1 minute we would be at an EEA level 1, and we might go from that to an EEA level 3 in 5 minutes. and they're saying we need 14 megawatts, we need 60 megawatts. So we flip the switch. What we're gonna do to be more organized is give Sunflower blocks of energy, of circuits. So we could say, this particular feeder out of this substation is worth 5 megawatts. This one's worth 10. This one's worth 8. And have those set in line for them so we don't overburden any one particular area or group of people, right? That was one of the lessons learned. We were hitting Spearville and Wright, some of those other areas pretty hard, and we called Sunflower and said, stop. It was even to the point where I had both presidents of Cargill and National Beef on a conference call. And, you know, that's a pretty tough conversation, but it was well worth having. The conversation went like this: we need you to curtail, right? We need you to shut down the operations. But we don't want to. It's not your choice. I'm going to cut you off. I don't want to cut you off. When you're in the middle of a shift, you got 1,000 employees standing there, holding knives, nobody's doing anything, you got meat hanging in the racks, and we turn the lights on. Because I can't look you in the eye and tell you at your businesses or at your homes that you're gonna get turned off, but we're gonna keep them on, right? Now that becomes a bit of a political football, but we're willing to play that, okay? We're willing to stick up for those folks sitting right here and at our homes, because it's all of us together. And fortunately, and to their credit, they comply. And I appreciate that. You know, Gerald's a prime example, Pride Ag, they complied. You know, we had people helping out. And so that's why we chose just that 15th through the 19th to charge for that power, because we wanted to recognize those that shut down. So the big guys get a cheaper bill. It's still not cheap, but it's less than it would have been, right? So we're going to do a better job of, God forbid, we have to go through this again, scheduling those to have a less of an impact or lessen the burden on our members individually at their homes and their businesses. 30 minutes max if we can help it. 30 minutes off, you come back on, we coordinate with the gas company, and then we rotate it to the next set. Does that answer your question?
Well, and people that work in these plants, when the power goes off, so do some of them's paychecks. It's not just a
they're not
company
working.
profit thing.
I'm not certain exactly how Cargill and National Beef handled that. I don't know if they paid them or didn't. My guess is they probably paid them.
They did, but that is an individual company thing.
That's right.
There could be, what I'm getting at is there could be others around that are not that big and can't afford to do that with their employees.
Right. And
So all I'm saying is I understand when they get cut off, it's not just profits cut off, it's employees too.
No, it's employees too, right? And you have kids in schools, the school district, DC3, USD 443. I had a conference call with all the USD school districts in Southwest Kansas. They all comply. They all shut down. That impacts their business, right? Whether it's educating kids or whatever it is they're doing, right? Those other folks out there that helped out. I mean, we have to give credit where credit is due. But I'm telling you, if we didn't, and had we not worked together like we did, it would have been much worse. It's easy for us to look back in the rearview mirror, right? But, you know, we would have been having a whole other conversation if 3 weeks after that event, we're still sitting here with the lights on. Y'all would want the tar and feather me.
Yeah,
And I didn't want that to happen. So, anyway, good comment. Other thoughts before we wrap it up? Yes, sir?
So the bill that I got that I paid for it was for February. That was for everything except what you charged me for. What you anticipated the charge to be based on whatever.
Okay, so I don't guess I understand the question. Your February bill was a normal bill.
Right.
You're only going to see March, the March power bill on your April. When you get your bill in April, it's going to be for March, and that's when you're going to see it. Your February bill shouldn't have anything on it.
Right. Okay. So yeah. Well, this is the March bill that I paid for February. So.
Yes.
We're talking about the same thing.
Oh, I'm sorry, Angela. Am I not understanding
No,
incorrectly?
we're talking about the same thing. You received the bill around March 12-ish. It was for February use. It doesn't have any of the event on it yet.
Okay.
We took that out and didn't charge
So
it
the extra
anymore.
$300 is not on this.
It's not on your February
It
bill.
won't be there until April.
That's correct. We carried it for a month, and we're only gonna show it on your next month's bill.
So what did I actually pay for?
You paid for February use without the event.
So we charged it just like a normal month. We took the event, the 15th through the 19th.
I paid for
out of it.
23 days.
Say again?
I paid for 23 days minus the 5
That's one way of
days.
looking at it, sure.
All right, got it. All right, and then the other thing is just a comment, because you're talking about backup batteries, I don't know what kind of lithiums, and there's a shortage of lithium. You think about, your engineers thinking about hydrogen fuel cells as a way of storable energy, hydrogen?
We're looking at, so through our national organization, we've got a group called CRN, or Cooperative Research Network. We do work with NREL, the National Renewable Energy Labs, all across the nation. There's several of them that are working on projects and looking at that type of technology. And it's basically saying, at what point does it become cost effective? So short answer is yes, we're looking at any and all ways that we can, offset with generation. Okay? Okay, well, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. If you have any further questions after the meeting or any time, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Come by the office. You can give us a call. If I'm here, I'll take your call, and feel free, because you may have questions after the fact. Okay? Thank y'all very much.